Okay.
I agree. I think it should go back to the original owner.
Very interesting.
I agree.
But that being said, it would have been destroyed had he or she not gone to the effort to save it, and it only exists because of that effort. So, I mean, one wonders whether it should remain with the person who rescued it.
Good point.
I think it has to go to the original owner and not reward is necessary.
Okay. Should it be a reward for that, or it just go to the original owner?
Just go to
Just
the
go
original.
there.
Just go to the original owner.
Very interesting. Okay. So, what will be the principle that they will move you to say that? What will be the value? What is? Try to rationalize your answer. Why would you say you said that? You see, here you start having something that the rabbis know as conflicting values. Whenever you have to make an ethical decision, you are going to have conflicting values. Things that you learn in the past, most of the time. One thing that you learn will tell you, oh, that book should be returned. Other thing you learn might tell you, no, that person should keep the book because he put his life in danger and so forth. So then you have to know which value you should listen to. So what the rabbis created is like a ranking of different values, and some values are before some other values. And that will help the rabbis, and hopefully you, to make a more informed ethical decision. And we are going to see in a minute what kind of values this rabbi applied to solve this dilemma. Okay, before we do that, any other opinion? I would like to know what moves you to say the book should be returned.
I think you do things, good things, without expecting anything after that. And how do you feel? I wouldn't feel good to keep that book with me. It's like, I don't know, although I do many things, well, I don't know, that you don't expect a reward and you do it because you feel like it is like that. It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the book only even exists today to be debated because he risked his life to save it. If he hadn't done that, then it would have been lost in the fire. So, in a way, it's lost to its previous owners as is, regardless. They left it behind. For whatever reason, he risked his life to save it.
Yeah, it looks like this man always wanted this book. That's the impression that I have from this. And he had the opportunity now to finally have it, even though he had to put his life at risk to achieve that. But let's move to the next slide, because I tried to find some kind of similarities, or what we call precedents, to try to help understand this complex case. So one kind of similar things, and you may have heard about this, is the law of salvage. Have you ever heard about that? This is usually applied to boats and ships. And the law of salvage is a concept in maritime law which states that a person who recovers another person's ship or cargo after peril or loss at sea is entitled to a reward commensurate with the value of the property so saved. The concept has its origins in antiquity, with the basis that a person will be putting himself and his own vessel at risk to recover another, and thus should be appropriately rewarded. So it looks like in this case, with the ships, if you rescue one, you cannot claim property. You have the obligation to return it, but at a fair reward. I don't know how this could be applied in these days, because sometimes international law could be very tricky, and you have different laws at stake here. But I'm trying to understand the principle. And things that we have here, at least with ships, that's what happened. If you rescue one, then you have to return it to the original owner, but the original owner has to pay you. Okay, so if the original owner is willing to pay you for whatever the value is, you have to return it. But this is tricky because there is a difference between a ship in the middle of the ocean and this book in the fire. And we will see here what is the value, the Jewish value involved in this. In this case, since the owner of the book abandoned it and had no intention of recovering it, it is considered hefker. And remember this word. This is a Hebrew word, hefker, that it means abandoned. And available for requisition by the person who rushed into the fire. So this is a very interesting concept, that it was ruled by the rabbis. If something, could be any object, is considered hefker, and we're going to see in a minute what has to happen to be considered hefker. If something has the label hefker, then it's ownerless. And if you get your hands on it, it's yours, and you have no obligation to give it to anybody else, even if that used to belong to somebody else. But if the status at this point is hefker, is 100% yours. You see, in the law of salvage is different, because if you see a ship in the middle of the ocean, it doesn't really mean that it was abandoned. Maybe the owner went to look for help and eventually will come back to rescue it. So you cannot really say that it's hefker. So if you happen to salvage it, then of course the other person has to pay you for that, and it's not really yours. But in this case, as we analyze this case, what happened with this book, it seems to me that it qualifies as hefker, especially because the story said specifically that the owner was willing to let the book burn. It was clearly stated in this story. So that book was hefker, ownerless. And it seems to imply that the person who rushed into the fire and rescued it now has all the right to own it. And then again, I mentioned about conflicting values, because some of you may think, yeah, well, but now I feel bad for the original owner of the book. Yeah, that's another value. That you may say that will be another value called preserving the peace. So is it really worth it to keep that book if you are going to be at odds with your neighbor for the rest of your life? You see, you have two different values there, and then you will have to decide which one is more important. Because yes, according to the rabbis, you have the Jewish law right to keep the book, but the rabbis also say you should try to preserve peace among human beings. So, but at the end of the day, in this case, it's going to be your decision. Let's analyze a little bit more how or when the rabbis regulated all these cases of hefker. Now, let me introduce to a new word for many of you. The word is Talmud. The Talmud is a book. Actually, more than a book, it's an encyclopedia. It's a collection. It's volumes and volumes. The Talmud contains what we call the oral law. And I want to go very quickly over this, because there will be a specific class where we are going to study all these little things. We believe as Jews that God revealed the written Torah, the Bible, actually the Torah, the five books of the Torah, is from Genesis to Deuteronomy. God revealed that to Moses. But at the time that God revealed that to Moses, God explained to Moses orally how to understand the Torah. So the Torah was written. It's the same thing that if you go to a synagogue, you will see that we read the actual Torah every week. It's written on parchment with special calligraphy, and there will be somebody in the synagogue who prepared or studied really hard to read the Torah in the proper way. That's the written Torah, the one that we believe was revealed to Moses. But also, all these oral explanations that Moses learned, he passed it to the next leader of the Jewish people, who was Joshua. So Joshua learned all this oral information from Moses. Joshua taught all that information to the next generation, what we call the elders of Israel. The elders learn all that and pass it also to the next generation and so forth. All that oral information continued to be oral for many, many, many generations. Fast forward to the Roman Empire. When the Romans conquered the land of Israel, one of the things that they did was to target the rabbis, the teachers of the Jewish people, the ones who knew all this oral information that is supposed to stay oral. There was a big risk to lose all that information about the ways to interpret the Torah. So they decided to get together and to write it down. And you can imagine, when you have something that is in an oral form and it continues for so many generations, you will have so many different versions of it. You know the game when you said something to somebody else on the ear, and then that person tells to the next one, 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 and then you put the first one and the last one, and they don't really have the same version because something happened in between. So this is the same that happened with the oral law, the oral information. There were many rabbis, and they have slightly different versions of the same thing. So they got all together, and what the Talmud is a record of all those discussions, or of the way they remembered what they were taught by their teachers. It's fascinating. It's a back and forth of information, and then at the end, the rabbis kind of voted, and they decided what version they were going to take, and that became Jewish law. So when we are talking about Jewish law, we have two, and actually three, sources of law. We have the law that is coming directly from the written Torah, the law that is coming from the rabbis that it could be found in the Talmud, and the law that came to us through tradition. In other words, is some kind of tradition was kept for several generations that becomes a new law for the Jewish people. Perfect example is the kippah that I'm wearing. Look, this thing here, the kippah. The obligation for every male to wear a kippah in the synagogue is not in the Torah, it's not in the Talmud, but it's still an obligation. How come? Because it was a tradition that it was kept for multiple generations and became a new law, and we cannot change it. That's what the Talmud is in a nutshell. We're going to study that at a deeper level in future classes. But for now, that's what you need to know. And we are going to have that word in every class. So please remember, the Talmud is nothing else than the oral law as presented by the rabbis. So the Talmud has a similar case. And they would say in this: one person is carrying a cask full of wine along the road. Another is carrying a cask of honey. In those days, honey was worth more than wine. The honey cask breaks and starts to leak. The person carrying it gives up hope of bringing it to the market. The second man then pours out his wine, very smart guy, right, and uses his cask to catch the dripping honey. So, is that person allowed to do that? The one who was carrying the wine, to drop his wine and start catching all the honey? What do you think?
Sure.
Opportunist.
Yeah, it is. And by the way, whenever the Talmud mentions honey, it's not the bee honey. You know, I don't know if you ever heard this expression that sometimes we use related to the land of Israel. The land of Israel is usually described as a land of milk and honey. Well, in those days, what they used to call honey was date syrup. Almost like here in Canada, we have the maple syrup. Those kind of syrups, they used to call honey in those days. Interestingly enough, because of the evolution of marketing, now they cannot use the word honey for that, because it's kind of a trademark for something that it has to come from bees. So we use syrup. We don't use honey anymore. But back in the day, syrups were used to call honey. So that was something that was very expensive to produce. That's why in this case, I would say that honey was worth more than probably the cheap wine that they have in those days. They didn't have the technology to produce wine that we have today. Back in the day, wine was nothing more than fermented grapes. Just like that. It's probably gross. I don't know. But this is what it is. Okay? So you would say, yeah, it's an opportunity, but hey, fair game. I drop my wine and I start catching all this honey. But the rabbi says, ho, not so fast, because the Talmud rules that the man saving the honey gets only as much honey as would cover his effort, because the honey he saved was not really ownerless. And because it was not really on the edge of complete destruction, much of it could be recovered if the owner returned with another barrel. So in other words, what the Talmud is saying is, the guy, yes, you can put your own cask or barrel to catch all that honey, but only until the owner comes back. You cannot make that hole where the honey is dripping any bigger, because the owner will have enough time to go and come back with another barrel and to save some of that. So things don't become hefker right away. In general, there is a waiting time for something to become hefker. It has to be absolutely clear that it is ownerless and that there is no hope of recovering any of it. And that's the moment when it becomes ownerless and you can take it. So let me give you here the resolution of the rabbi who heard this case the first time. His name was Rabbi Meir ben Baruch of Rothenburg, and he lived in Germany from the years 1215 to 1293. And he wrote about this in one book, so that's how we know this story. So this rabbi said, in the case of the fire, the book was about to be completely destroyed. The owner had given up hope. So that's one of the things that you need to consider something hefker. The owner has to give up hope. And therefore, the man who rescued it gets possession. So in this case, the rabbi said, yes, there are so many things, but technically, legally, the man can keep the book. He cannot be forced to sell it back to the original owner, because it's 100% clear, in this case, that is hefker. In these days, I will say it's probably way more complicated with house insurance and content insurance. Who knows? Maybe you want the book to burn, so you would collect insurance from it. I don't know. It's probably way more difficult, but that's not the case. We're trying to learn the principle here, and it's in general. You go through life, you find something. Is it yours? Can you keep it? Well, yes, only if it's hefker. Any questions? Okay. So let me share this with you. At the end of every ethical dilemma that we are going to study, I'm going to summarize the Jewish value that we are learning, in case you are taking notes. So you will quickly find the value class after class. So let's summarize hefker, abandonment. The answer to this case is based on a Jewish legal principle called hefker. It means abandonment. The idea is this: when a person loses something, until when does it have to be returned? The answer, until, is hefker. When is that? When the original owner gives up hope of ever recovering it. In other words, when it is abandoned. There are rules about how long that takes, but in general, if the object can be identified, and this is very important, according to Jewish law, you have to wait a year and a day, and then it's yours. And if the object cannot be identified, if it has no distinguishing, describable attributes like a $20 bill, it becomes hefker immediately. Right? If you find a $20 bill in the street, well, who can actually describe the object in a way that you can actually believe that it belonged to that person, unless the person can say the serial number of the bill, then you can't really tell that the other person was the real owner of the money. Let's say you're walking on the street, you see the $20 bill, you pick it up, and somebody else saw you doing that. And the person comes to you and says, hey, that money is mine. How do you know? Can you describe it without me showing you it has any special mark? No. So then technically you don't have the obligation to pass that money to the other person because you can't be sure that the person is the owner. But let's say that you find a wallet. And then the person said, that wallet is mine. Oh, really? Prove it to me. Well, inside has my driver license, so this is my name. So you open it, oh, it's here, so it's yours. Because it's identified, you can identify that thing. But if you find something that you can identify, and you try to find the owners, and you couldn't, then after a year and a day, that becomes yours. Because I guess back in the day when this law was written, in average, was pretty clear that after a year, you didn't find something, you lose hope to ever recover it, and then it becomes hefker. That's exactly what we do at the Shaarei Zedek with the lost and found things. We keep it in a box, we put the date, and when we find things, and then after a year and a day, we donate all the content of the lost and found box based on the hefker principle. Questions? Don't be shy. I hate when it becomes a lecture. I like to hear your comments.
The only thing I have to say about this is that, for example, in the book case, no, we have to know a little about the life of the other person, because perhaps that person was trying to save his kids, and I don't know, he had his wife beside him, and the other person was by himself, so he can take care of other stuff. So I think there's involved other things that they have to be considered. I don't know, because it doesn't mean that he left the book. Perhaps he had other things before, no, to try to say.
Yeah, and that's why actually when I presented the story, I put some clues there that are kind of hidden, but it's now if you read it back, right, that said, it's one Jew stayed long enough to save a really valuable book whose owners had abandoned it. Now it takes it to a whole different level, right? To know now, after the fact, that the owner actually abandoned it. It was pretty clear they left it behind and not even tried.
There's a really big difference between giving up hope and abandoning it. So
Yeah.
I would think of an example where Hefker would not come into play would be, let's say, a person has their mother's necklace and their mother passed away in the Holocaust and she loses the necklace. And 40 years goes by and she's absolutely given up hope. Someone finds the necklace, I don't think Hefker applies in that. I think someone has a duty to try and return that.
Of course.
Let's say it has like a locket with a picture in it or something.
Yeah, but the interesting...
Does it just become theirs after a year and a day?
It technically, yes. But as I mentioned before, sometimes there are multiple principles conflicting with each other, right? Because once you understand the circumstances where that was lost, you may want to forego the hefker. Technically, and this is what it's happening with every law, technically you could claim that it's yours, right? But that's the technicality of the law. In other words, what we know this day as the letter of the law, and then you always have the spirit of the law. Hopefully, we always follow the spirit of the law, not necessarily the letter of the law. In this case, I will say the same thing. If you know that you rescued something that it was really valuable for your neighbor, if it were me, I won't sacrifice my good relationship with my neighbor for a silly book. I will just give it back. But, sometimes in in real life, when people go in front of a judge, is and somebody is stubborn to apply the letter of the law. Unfortunately, the judge have to follow the letter of the law, and it's not really fair, but it's possible. And yes, and I will say that that happened many times with many things with the Holocaust. Some people return it right away, and some people claim that no, it's theirs, and they may not have a legal obligation to return it. Even though there is another principle that I better mention it now, that it will come on several classes, which is dina bemalchuta dina. Those three words are in Aramaic, which is also a very old language. In fact, the Talmud was written in Aramaic. It was not written in Hebrew. The dina b'malchuta dina means the law of the kingdom is your law. In other words, if there is a conflict between a Jewish law and a law of a country, you always follow the law of the country. That's something that we Jews learn. For example, we have the obligation to light the Shabbat candles every Friday night. But if you're in university in a dorm, and the dorm has a policy that is a law, that you are not allowed to light any kind of fire inside that room, you cannot argue, sorry, Jewish law says that every Friday night I have to light 2 candles. So I'm going to break the dorm rule, and I'm going to do it because I'm a Jew. Well, it doesn't really work that way. Dina b'malchuta dina, the law of the country is your law. So you have to obey the dorm's rules, and you cannot light those candles. Okay, that's very important. So in this case, yes, hefker, everything is fine. But if there is a civil law that says that even after a year you have to return something, then you have to. This is in a case where that's why also the story specifically say that this was a dispute between 2 Jews, and we learn from the rabbis that when there is a dispute between 2 Jews, instead of going to civil court, you should try to go to your rabbi and to try to have what is called a din Torah, which is an arbitration based on Torah, which is exactly what happened. But remember, that story was written in the 1200s, where that was very common. In these days, very uncommon that when there is a problem between 2 Jews, they go to a rabbi for a solution. Most of the time, they just go to civil court. Any other questions?
I had a question on that then. I don't know, like, if, for example, today in Israel, do you know if the law is based on Hefker then? If, like, the whole property law in Israel is based on Hefker?
No, I have no
No.
clue.
Okay. Yeah,
No.
that's great. Oh, well.
I have a question.
Yes, Mario.
In the first case, the man who rescued the book put in danger his life.
Yes.
Life is a lot more important than a material book. This has an ethic again.
Yes.
It's not correct to put his life. It's not a good teaching about that.
Absolutely. And I don't want to talk too much about that because it's going to come in future classes. That's what's going to be one of the values that we're going to study.
Okay.
But good point. You could be a rabbi.
I have a question.
Yes.
Hi,
Ahmed.
So just about the Dina Malchuta Dina, is that all the time? Because there are times when the law of a country, say, is twisted or unjust, you know. So for example, let's assume I lived in Germany in 1930s, and of course the law there was just corrupted in every level, right? So does that concept apply there? Like, because the Jewish law would prohibit the evil that was done at the time. So I'm sure there are times when that concept does not apply if the law of the country is not just, right?
Yes. As a general rule, the first opportunity you have, the first argument you have for not obeying something is when something is specifically designed to target Jews.
Okay.
Okay? And the other thing is when life is at risk, yours or somebody else's.
Okay.
But in general, we have the obligation to obey the law of the country. Or to leave the country. It happened many times where there was some kind of laws in countries where, even though they didn't specifically target Jews, it interfered with Jewish life. Then people left the place, right? If they couldn't find a solution for themselves. One of the things that I can think of, for example, if you live in a place where they ban circumcision, and you know that it's not necessarily to target Jews. They simply, I don't know, for whatever reason, they ban circumcision. So if you decide to stay in that country, you can't break the law. You can't. So then it's a big dilemma for a Jew. What do you do? And most people will say, I'm moving to another place. Or if, for example, what they're trying to do in Poland, that they are trying to ban any kind of slaughtering of animals that is based on exsanguination. You know what exsanguination is? Is when you kill the animal by draining the animal from the blood. And that's the way kosher meat is processed, or halal meat is processed. It's called by exsanguination. So they're trying to ban that. That means that you could be in a situation where you live in a country where it will be no kosher meat. What do you do? Some people will decide to leave. Now, you can't go in your backyard and do it yourself because that would be illegal. So that's an example where sometimes you have to obey the law of the land, and you will have to decide if you're comfortable staying or not. Okay?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's continue with the class for today, which is Rosh Hashanah. Now, this is it's a very interesting thing. Because I don't know how much you know about Rosh Hashanah, but I'm going to tell you something that, if you know about Rosh Hashanah, might be mind-blowing. Almost everything we do in Rosh Hashanah is not from the Torah. It's coming from the rabbis. There are many other holidays that they are heavily based on Torah, on written Torah, like Passover, right? Or Yom Kippur. Is specifically written in the Torah. But Rosh Hashanah, and we make such a big deal out of it, is almost 100% rabbinical. The other thing, the only thing that is kind of mentioned in the Torah is the blowing of the shofar. The shofar is a horn that is coming from a kosher animal, except that it cannot come from a cow, but it's usually from a ram. And that we blow it on Rosh Hashanah. And the month before Rosh Hashanah. The month before Rosh Hashanah, we blow it every day. And then Rosh Hashanah, there are very specific sets of how we blow the shofar. Before I go any further, let me play the shofar for you. I have a video here, so you can have an idea what I'm talking about. Okay, did you hear that? Very good. That was our shaman, Bill Weissman, from the congregation Shari Zedek, and he is kind of our professional shofar blower year after year. He's great at that. So the obligation to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is coming from Leviticus, the book of Leviticus, chapter 23, verses 23 to 25. And it says like this: Again, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, In the 7th month on the first day of the month, you shall have a rest, a reminder by teruah, a holy convocation. You shall not do any laborious work, but you shall present an offering by fire to the Lord. So, let me explain what's going on here. This is the commandment of Rosh Hashanah. And you may know, Rosh Hashanah is the first day of the Jewish calendar. But hold on a minute. This verse says that Rosh Hashanah is going to be celebrated on the 7th month. So, whoa. What is it? Is it the first month or is it the 7th month? Because the Torah implies that it's the 7th month, not the first. Because Rosh Hashanah means the beginning of the year. Remember the beginning of the class? Shana Tova. Shana means year, right? Rosh means head or beginning. Ha in Hebrew means of the. Shana, the year. So the beginning of the year. First day of the first month. But Leviticus says that is the first day of the 7th month. What's going on? Well, let me explain. What's happening is that in Judaism, we have two different calendars. We're going to study that in a class that we are going to study specifically the calendar. But for now, you should know that we have two calendars. One is coming from the Torah. The other one is the rabbinic calendar. So in the Torah, Rosh Hashanah is the first day of the 7th month. In the rabbinic calendar, that was developed in Babylonia, is the first day of the first month. Okay? So that's why the confusion here. So the month that when in the rabbinic calendar is called Tishrei corresponds to the 7th month in the Torah. In the Torah, all the months have numbers. In the rabbinic calendars, every month has a name. So the first day of the Jewish year, according to the rabbis, is Tishrei. Okay? And that's the 7th month in the Bible. Okay, so let's continue with the Torah. Let's see what the Torah says that we should do on Rosh Hashanah. You should have a rest, right? Like every other holiday, we don't work. And then it says, a reminder by teruah. And I didn't want to translate this Hebrew word teruah, because if you go to any translation of the Bible, it most likely will say a reminder by the blowing of the shofar or the blowing of the trumpets or something like that. That will be the translation. But I didn't want to translate it because even though the rabbis decided that teruah is the blowing of the shofar, it's not clear. Because teruah can mean many things, as we are going to see in a minute. Okay, then a holy convocation. Every time the Torah says a holy convocation, it means that everybody has to go to the temple. We used to have a temple in Jerusalem. The temple was destroyed. The only thing we have now in Jerusalem, if you go to Israel, the only thing we have from the temple is the western wall, also called the Wailing Wall. So that's the only thing we have left. So back in the day when we had the temple, before the temple was destroyed, people will have to go year after year, the first day of Tishrei, to the temple to hear or to make that teruah. Okay? Then no work, as I mentioned, and you should present an offering by fire to the Lord. That means you have to present a sacrifice in the temple together with that teruah. But what is teruah? Why is the confusion? Is it the shofar or is not the shofar? Well, let's see other sources in the Bible. You see, when you don't know how to understand the word, the most common technique by the rabbis is they go to a different section of the Bible where the same word is presented, and then they read the context and they try to understand the meaning of the word. So, in the book of Joshua, the word teruah is used again. And it says, when a long blast is sounded on the horn, as soon as you hear that sound of the horn, that's the shofar, right? All the people shall give a mighty teruah. Thereupon the city wall will collapse, and the people shall advance, every man straight ahead. So this is the famous story of the city of Jericho, with Joshua and the Jewish army will walk around the city for 7 times. They have to be very quiet. And then after the 7th round, it says here in the book of Joshua, somebody will blow the shofar, Okay? And when you hear the blowing of the shofar, you have to give a mighty teruah. Whoa. You see, this text implied that the teruah is not done by the shofar. The teruah is something produced by the people. And if you go to Joshua 6:5 in any English Bible, you will see that the word teruah is translated as shouting. So teruah basically is shouting or a big noise produced by people, which is not uncommon in different worship scenarios. It's very common if you go in this day to evangelical churches that the pastor will say, give a big shout to the Lord, and everybody will go crazy. And that is the teruah. You don't need a shofar for the teruah. Teruah means big shouting or a big noise that you have to produce. So you see that it's not a slam dunk to say that teruah is the blowing of the shofar. It could be understood as big shouting. In fact, there is a Jewish sect called the Karaites that they still exist. They rejected the authority of the Talmud that they don't blow the shofar for Rosh Hashanah. They have a day of shouting. We're going to talk more about the Karaites when we study Jewish denominations. Okay? So, if this is the case, then why are we blowing the shofar? Is there any other source in the Bible where the word teruah and the shofar are put together? Yes, there is. And this is in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verses 5 and 6. It says, but when you sound a teruah, you see, but the way the verse is written, it is clear that the teruah is coming from an instrument, most likely a horn or a trumpet. So when you sound a teruah, the divisions encamped on the east should move forward. And when you sound short blasts, you see, here is exactly what we do with the shofar, the short blasts. The second time, those encamped on the south shall move forward. Thus, short blasts should be blown for setting them in motion. So in other words, Deuteronomy is presenting here a way to communicate quickly to everybody so people will know what to do. So it looks like back in the day, they have these codes with the shofar. Different sounds will mean different things. And all those sounds were called a teruah. And there was something produced with the shofar. So the rabbis understand from this verse, from Deuteronomy, that teruah equals blowing of the shofar. And that's exactly why we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Which, by the way, the name Rosh Hashanah doesn't appear in the Torah at all. The only description that we have is Day of Remembrance by Teruah, which is one of the names of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Zichron Teruah. But because the rabbis decided that it's going to be the first day of the rabbinic calendar, they called it, the rabbis called it, Rosh Hashanah. And because we are rabbinic Jews, we follow the ordinances by the rabbis, we also call it Rosh Hashanah, and not necessarily Yom Zichron Teruah. Okay? So this is a very interesting thing, because at the end of the day, whatever we do as Jews is mostly coming from the Torah, but as presented by the rabbis. Very important to understand that concept. Now, why would the rabbis start the calendar in a different month? Because the Bible starts the calendar in the month of Passover. But why would the rabbis move it to Tishrei, which is the 7th month? Because here we go back to the oral law, things that they were taught to Moses in an oral form. And the rabbis believe that God communicated to Moses that on Rosh Hashanah, on the first day of the 7th month, if you want, or on the first day of Tishrei, all creatures pass before God as sheep before a shepherd. As the verse states, he fashions the heart of them all, he discerns all of their deeds. The rabbis understand, by the way, the Mishnah is part of the Talmud. It's one of the sections of the Talmud. We'll learn about that. So the rabbis understood that Rosh Hashanah is a very important day of the year where God starts a process of judging every creature. And why will God judge every creature on that specific day? What's so special about that day of the calendar? Well, we need to keep moving into rabbinic law. I missed the slide here. Let me add it quickly. Let me see if I have it here. Missed one, which is the I will add it here. That is that Rabbi Eliezer says the universe was created in Tishrei. So this is what happened. Uh-oh. Want to get it right so you will have it right. Boom. Very good. This is 28. Ta-da! Now you have it. Rabbi Eliezer says the universe was created in Tishrei. So this is also oral law. This is also oral law. It's not written in the Torah, but we learn it through oral law. That there was this knowledge among the rabbis, and actually there was kind of a consensus that the whole universe was created in the month of Tishrei. And that's why it makes sense that all the creatures are judged on Tishrei, because this is the anniversary of the creation of the universe. It's like if you work in a company, sometimes after a year that you work there, you will be reviewed by your boss. So this is the same. Our boss, our big boss, is reviewing our behavior after a year in this world. So every year, God has a conversation with us to give us God's evaluation of our behavior. And that's what is so important about Rosh Hashanah, but it's all coming through oral law, not through necessarily biblical information. Okay? So, let's continue. According to Midrash Rabbah, which is a book also on rabbinic knowledge, even if you want to assume the position of Rabbi Eliezer, remember Rabbi Eliezer? The universe was created in Tishrei. Even if one assumes the position of Rabbi Eliezer, the world was actually created on the 25th day of Elul. The month of Elul is the last month of the year, so it's the month immediately before Tishrei. Again, more information coming in the calendar class. So the rabbis understand that the beginning of the creation of the world was not the first day of Tishrei, but was the 25th day of Elul. However, since man, so in this case, he's talking about Adam and Eve, who represents the ultimate purpose of creation, was created on the 6th day, which corresponds to the 1st of Tishrei. This day is considered to be the true beginning of creation. So in other words, when we celebrate Rosh Hashanah and we say Rosh Hashanah is the creation of the world, it's not really the beginning of the creation, but the end of the creation. So the first day of Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of the creation of Adam and Eve, and the second day of Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of the first Sabbath day in history, when we read in the Bible that God rested. So that's how the rabbis put the timeline of creation. So the 25th day of Elul is when everything started, which, by the way, this day, the 25th day of Elul is tomorrow, Monday. So that will be the anniversary when God said, let it be light. And there was light, and God separated light from darkness. And it was good. So that's what is going to be celebrated tomorrow, the beginning of the creation of the world. So let's continue now. Because the rabbis believe that Rosh Hashanah is not a stand-alone festival or holiday, but is linked to the next one, which is Yom Kippur, which is going to be the next class, but I'm going to give you a little preview of the spirit of Yom Kippur because it's deeply connected with Rosh Hashanah. So you see at the bottom of the text it says TB Rosh Hashanah 16b. TB means Talmud from Babylonia, because we have two versions of the Talmud from Babylonia and the Talmud from Jerusalem. 99% of the time I'm going to use the Talmud from Babylonia because that's the one that has most authority in Jewish life. So this is from the Talmud. It's come from a tractate or from the book called Rosh Hashanah, and it's on page 16b, because in the Talmud you always have a page and then A and B, two sides of the same page. So Rabbi Kruspedai said that Rabbi Yochanan said on Rosh Hashanah. By the way, you see how rabbis, they never give their opinion. The rabbis are always quoting what they learn. This is very important to understand about the Talmud. In the Talmud, you will never have rabbis giving their opinions. They're always quoting their teachers, because this is a way to link whatever they learn with the original teaching that God gave to Moses. So it's something that was passed from Moses to Joshua, Joshua to the elders, elders to the prophets, and so forth, blah, 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 then to one rabbi, to another rabbi, to another rabbi. So most of the time, whenever a rabbi will say something, he will make it clear. I'm not saying it because I made it up. I'm saying it because I learned it from my teacher. So Rabbi Kuspedai said that Rabbi Yochanan said, on Rosh Hashanah, 3 books are opened. One for the thoroughly wicked. One for the thoroughly righteous. And one for the intermediates. The thoroughly righteous are immediately inscribed and sealed for life. The thoroughly wicked are immediately inscribed and sealed for death. The intermediates hang in the balance from Rosh Hashanah until Yom Kippur. So here the rabbis are linking the two festivals. If they are found worthy, then they are inscribed for life. If not, then they are inscribed for death. And that's why Rosh Hashanah plus Yom Kippur are called the high holidays, the two together, because according to rabbinic literature, they are connected. And they connect the two in the Talmud through this story from the rabbis, of the story of the 3 books. Now you can understand better, let me go here to the beginning, you can understand better the expression that I taught at the beginning, when it says, Leshana tova tikatevu vetichatemu. May you be inscribed and sealed for a good year. Inscribed and sealed where? In the book of life. Because if we have 3 books, what we want is everybody to be inscribed in the book of life. So that's why the original wish for Rosh Hashanah was, may you be inscribed and sealed for a good year. Now you understand it. See, you have to be patient to understand that concept. Okay, so this is coming from the story of the 3 books. That is very important in Rosh Hashanah and in Yom Kippur. There are 10 days in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and they are called the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, or the 10 days of repentance. In other words, you have an opportunity for those 10 days to change your behavior, to prove God that you deserve to have another year on earth. So it's a time of reflection, time of prayer, time where if you come to synagogue every day, you will notice some differences on the text of the prayers, because everything is designed to inspire worshipers to make some kind of spiritual and physical and behavioral changes during this time of the year, because we believe is a time of deep connection with God, and it's a time that God is almost like looking or watching closely of everything we do. We are trying to prove our case that we deserve to be here for another year. Any questions?
I heard a lot, Shana Tova Umetuka. What does it mean, Umetuka?
Metuka means sweet. Matok in Hebrew means sweet. But again, it's female, right? Metuka. So basically, you're wishing people a good and sweet year. Yeah, some people say Metuka as well. Good point. Yeah. It's more like it's a more secular way of saying Shana Tova, in the Metuka. But it's still valid. Yeah. Any questions? I mean, here, these are heavy theological aspects of Judaism, so don't be shy. You can ask whatever you want.
Probably to be in the good book, you have to do mitzvah. That's correct?
Well, mitzvah, let's start defining some of the words. Mitzvot means commandments. So, yeah, I believe what you ask is one way to get some extra credit in God's eyes is to start observing more commandments, more things that God said that we should be doing, and we haven't done, but now we'll start doing it. Yes, that's one way. But I believe that it's beyond that. It's beyond that. There are many things that we know that we could do better, and they are not necessarily specific rituals in Judaism that we don't do. There are many other things that we could do. In fact, if you come to the High Holiday service, there is a part there when we, you will see at the service that we are beating our hearts, and we are confessing all our sins, all our transgressions. And you will see that all that list of transgressions, they are not about the rituals that we didn't fulfill, but about behavioral problems. Let me share this with you. If you give me a minute here, because this is a very interesting point. So I would like to share with you a little video that we did it for the Slichot service yesterday. I don't know how many of you have the opportunity to participate. Slichot is one of the services before Rosh Hashanah, so we have an opportunity to prepare ourselves for the high holidays. I have it here.
Aníbal,
Yes.
before going to that video, who will go directly to the Book of Life in Rosh Hashanah, for example? Because we are all, well, I think, no, we all have some mistakes. So we are all intermediately, we would say. Everyone will go from Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur until, you know what I mean? Because it says that there are people who will go directly to the Book of Life on Rosh Hashanah. So who is that? I don't know. It's like the majority will have something, no?
Yes, it's interesting because according to the rabbis, nobody goes to any of the extreme books right away. We are all intermediates.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, we are all intermediates.
Okay.
Let's see what happened here and why it's not playing. גזלנו,
דיברנו דופי,
דיברנו דופי,
איי 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 הבינו
הבינו,
והרשנו
והרשנו,
זדנו
זדנו,
חמצנו
חמסנו,
טפלנו שקר
טפלנו שקר.
איי איי איי
יצנו רע,
כי
זבנו, לצנו,
מרדנו,
מרדנו,
נייצנו,
נייצנו,
שררנו,
שררנו,
אבינו,
אבינו,
פשענו,
פשענו,
צררנו,
צררנו,
כישינו עורף,
כישינו הורף.
איי 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 רשענו,
רשענו,
שיחתנו,
שיחתנו,
תיעבנו,
תיעבנו,
טעינו,
טעינו,
תיתנו,
תיתנו. So you can see there that all that list has nothing to do with ritual mitzvot, ritual commandments. It's mostly behavioral. And that is why I think people get it all wrong for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's not about how often you go to synagogue, it's how often you hurt others and yourself. So that should be something that we should all have in mind whenever we prepare for Rosh Hashanah. So this process of changing our behavior is called teshuvah. Teshuvah means repentance. That is the act of changing for the better. And that's something that we engage in, that kind of process of teshuvah during Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And in order to do that, the rabbis understand the most powerful tool we have is the shofar, even though the Torah doesn't say why. And I want to share with you this text from a rabbi called Rambam, also called Maimonides. It was a Spanish rabbi. And he says, although the sounding of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is a chok, scriptural decree without rational basis. We're going to study that too, because there are some commandments from the Torah that's very clear why we do them, like you shall not kill. Do I have to explain you that? It's obvious. But if I say to you, you have to blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, you would say to me, okay, why? Well, all those commandments that has a why attached to them, they're called a chok. And the sounding of the shofar is a chok. We don't really know why the shofar and why not something else. So this rabbi said, even though the shofar is a chok, and this is funny because he said, even though it has no explanation, I'm going to tell you why. He said, it nevertheless implies the following. Arise, arise you who are fast asleep, and awaken you who slumber. Search your deeds and return, teshuvah, return in sincerity to your Creator. Those of you who have lost sight of the truth, who are distracted from it by transitory vanities, and have instead consumed by your entire year with empty and futile pursuits that will not bring deliverance, look well into yourselves and improve your behavior. Let each of you forsake your evil ways and harmful thoughts. In other words, Rambam is saying the shofar is an alarm clock. You see what happened? When you're asleep and you know that you have to wake up at a specific time, you don't rely on light, because you know that we human beings are almost like we train ourselves to block light. So we will keep sleeping unless we have a sound to wake us up, because it's more difficult to block sound than there is to block light. So in other words, we should all change our behavior based on the fact that we are receiving the light of God every day, but we block that light. And we disconnect ourselves from God because we know how to block light. But sound is more difficult to block. So that's why we blow the shofar. And we start blowing the shofar a month before Rosh Hashanah every day to wake ourselves up and to start the process of teshuvah, of repentance, of changing our behavior, preparing ourselves for Rosh Hashanah. And in Rosh Hashanah, if you come to synagogue, you will see that there are lots and lots and lots of sounds of the shofar during the service to help us finally wake up and to change as much as we can. Because it's always about doing your best.
I had a question about Rosh Hashanah.
Yes.
So where did the apples and honey come from, and like the other fruits during this time that you would eat during Rosh Hashanah? Like, do they come from the Talmud also then, or where did that come from?
That's tradition.
From tradition.
Tradition is not coming from the Talmud. There are so many traditions from Rosh Hashanah, from eating apples and honey to have a sweet ear, to put the head of a fish on the table, right? To follow the biblical verse that it said, "May you be the head and not the tail." So, and also to eat pomegranates on Rosh Hashanah because of all the seeds inside the pomegranate, and it's a sign of fertility and abundance. So there are many traditions that they are attached to Rosh Hashanah that they are not necessarily coming from the rabbis, but they became popular through tradition. As I mentioned before, tradition has a way to incorporate things into Judaism as well. Okay? And as I mentioned before, Rosh Hashanah has different names. One is Yom HaZikaron, Remembrance Day, but it's Yom Teruah, the day of Teruah, of the blowing of the shofar. Yom Hadin, Judgment Day, but we know that it's the beginning of the judgment. Not necessarily the day when God will judge you, but it's when this process of judgment starts. And then, of course, Rosh Hashanah, that's the most popular, the beginning of the year. So you might read in different Jewish sources any of these four names used in different moments. For example, in the Jewish liturgy, in the prayers for Rosh Hashanah, you have all of them mentioned in different places. And they are all talking about Rosh Hashanah. Usually the Machzor is the book that we use on Rosh Hashanah to follow the prayers. Usually they have footnotes explaining that those names actually represent Rosh Hashanah. And then, by the way, I hope you are all joining us for the Rosh Hashanah service at the Shari Zedek. It's going to be a great service this year. It's going to be online. And if you sign up for that, you're going to get one Machzor where you can follow all the prayers. And let's study a little bit about the traditions that we have for Rosh Hashanah. You may know some of them. First one is, the bread that we eat on Rosh Hashanah, that we call the challah, is rounded. The one we eat for Shabbat is long, but the one for Rosh Hashanah should be rounded. For each Shabbat, it is custom to have two regular chalot, the plural of challah. For Rosh Hashanah, the challah is always rounded. One of the explanations for this is that through the shape of the challah, we acknowledge that life is like a circle. It's a new beginning. Then we have the apple with honey. After the challah, we take the apple with the honey and say, "May it be your will, God our Lord and Lord of our ancestors, to grant us a good and sweet year." In other words, it's almost like a wish. It's not that we just want to have another year on this earth. We want a good and sweet year. We don't want just life for the sake of life. We want to be able to enjoy life as well. And we do it through apple and honey. By the way, forgot to mention, Rosh Hashanah is the anniversary of the creation of the world. According to the rabbis, that happened 5,780 years ago. Rabbinic belief is the world is only 5,780 years old. Not millions of years, just 5,000 and a bit. So that's very interesting. So the first day of Tishrei, next week, that is going to start the new month, is going to move into the year 5781. That's why you want to notice that. And then the other thing is send a greeting card. You may have heard that before. And it seems that the Maharil, Rabbi Yaakov Molin, during the 14th or 15th century, was the first one to send good wishes for people to be inscribed in the Book of Life to his friends and students. It is said that he based his teaching in what his teacher, Rabbi Shalom ben Yitzchak from Vienna, had done. During the month of Elul, that is the last month of the Jewish year, he will incorporate the phrase, "May you be inscribed and sealed for a good year," in all his letters. So this tradition of sending cards to friends is not as old as you may think. It's only coming from the 14th century, which in Jewish terms is kind of nothing, because we've been for thousands and thousands of years around. So that's when the tradition started. Questions?
I have a question.
Yes.
You know about the Christian or the traditional New Year at the end of December, and people make resolutions for the New Year. Is there a piece of that in the Jewish tradition of, I guess, resolving to be a better person? I don't know.
Absolutely. That's what is called the teshuvah, the repentance. It's not just that you regret what you did, which is important, or you confess your transgressions to God. You also make a resolution of not making those transgressions again, those mistakes again. And you sometimes, this is very important, we say out loud. It's almost like you make a deal with God that you're going to do this, 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 and this for the next year. And you ask for God's help to achieve those goals. That will be a little bit of the difference, that whenever we make a resolution on Rosh Hashanah, we make God a partner into that resolution. It's not something that you're supposed to do by yourself, but you ask for God's help.
Okay.
Any more questions?
You mentioned before that you already start a month before Rosh Hashanah to blow the shofar and stuff like that. So
Yes.
would this repentance and talk and making like the deal with God, would it already happen the month before Rosh Hashanah, or specifically between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur?
Specifically between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but basically you start the month before. It's like it's not much difference of real life. When you have to prepare yourself for a big trial, you don't prepare yourself the day of the trial. You start way before, right? You talk to your lawyer. The lawyer will make a mock trial, so he will ask you questions, so you'll have a chance to realize what you want to say, what you're going to do. So this is pretty much the same. You prepare yourself for the divine trial, and that starts a month in advance. That's the idea behind it, the principle behind it. So the prayers will have a few additions. So you will start thinking about the Shuvah. We'll have the shofar, and some shuls, some synagogues will prepare special classes where they will talk about the Shuvah, about repentance. So hopefully, little by little, they will plant that seed of behavioral change, so you can prepare yourselves spiritually and physically for the Rosh Hashanah. That's the idea. Any more questions? We have one more minute.
Oh, is there resources or things that we need to do before a class, or is it just come and?
Come, pay attention. I don't want you to be stressed for any class. I think I mentioned this to some of you. I mentioned it to some of you that I don't believe on this kind of, you have to read something before the class because then it won't go anywhere.
Okay.
So
Thanks.
please just come relax. You don't supposed to know anything. Okay? You don't supposed to read anything about. And then now that you have all this information, all this new information with you, hopefully now you can take some time during the week if you want to expand that and to read and to watch videos, etc. You can do that now. But don't feel that you have to prepare anything for any of the classes. During the next week, I'm going to finish, hopefully, the syllabus, and I will send it to your emails, together with the PDF of this class and a link for the recording. I apologize, I didn't start it at the very beginning of the class. I think I started the recording in the middle of an ethical dilemma. Hopefully, next class, I will remember to start the recording from the beginning. So feel free to remind me to start the recording. I will appreciate that. Okay?
Okay.
So thank you so much for being there. Next class is going to be Sunday, October 18th. So in between, you're going to have Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, Simchat Torah. Lots of things are going to happen, but we are going to study all of that after the fact, which still counts because you still have a whole life to celebrate those holidays in the proper way. Okay? If you have any questions, feel free to contact me. You all have my email, so I will be happy to answer any questions you have. So again, Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Shana Tova.
Very good. You paid attention. Or Shana Tova umetuka, as Mario said. Have a good and sweet year, and hope to see you soon. Bye now.
Bye.
Bye.